dare great things for Christ. Christ calls us to dare great things. In the marketplace, as well as in the mission field, there has never been a time like the present for the spirit of the Catholic entrepreneur. Now is the time for men and women of great courage and great vision to engage our church and our culture. Now is the time to dare great things. And here is your host as we dare great things, Father Nathan Cromley, the president and founder of the St. John Institute.
The life of King Solomon provides many inspiring examples for leaders to follow. At the same time, it details some of the warning signs for Christian leaders to avoid. In this final segment of our treatment of his life, we look at the legacy that his choices left. It's a good way for us to remember the legacy that our own choices will leave behind us. Leadership, just like anything else, is not just about what happens now, but about how what we do now will impact generations to come. Hey, we're going to go ahead and wrap up our session today on King Solomon. This is our last of our segment in our series on him, and I'm just really happy to talk with you about this last part because it's the most important, and it's namely the legacy that Solomon leaves behind him. And I love talking about this because most of the time when we read the Bible, we read these stories and, you only see a part of their life. You see the decisive turning point, or you see an action that they do. And it's not common that the Bible presents us with the totality of a person's life. So whenever it does, and you see this with the story of Jacob, with Isaac, with Abraham, with David, right? But there's thousands of lives in the Bible where you don't see the totality of their life. But with Solomon, you do. You have, the majority of this man's life from the time that he asked to rule is described for us here. Some 40 years of rule. It says in 1 Kings 11, verse 42, that Solomon ruled for 40 years over the house of Israel. So 40 years is given to us because the Bible wants us to see in his life the totality of the story. And with Solomon, anyway, we see the rise and the fall of this great man, and then finally the legacy. In other words, what happens because of the choices that he made in his leadership. And I think this is very important for us. In my work with Christian leaders, it's a theme that comes up all the time where the person tells me, I want to leave a legacy. And it's very touching. Because, of course, when we start off our companies or our business, it's all about surviving. And then it becomes about thriving, right? And then after you've made your business thrive and you're mid-50s going into your early 60s, it's almost not enough just to be successful. You want to know where you're going with it. It's a commonality with business leaders is that you're looking constantly towards the future, wondering what the next step is. And so it can kind of get in our way because when you're, underneath a successful person, you say, what more could they want? They have everything. You've got your country club membership and you've got your second home, in a warm spot and you've got your hobbies and you've got your winning company that you can retire with. And it's amazing because as a priest, of course, I'm beyond all of that. I'm with the actual person, the leader themselves, trying to accompany them on their pathway to holiness. And you see the heart of the business leader, something that people around them might not see. And a lot of times in the heart of a business owner who's been successful, there's an aching question, which is, well, where is all this going to go? You realize that, yes, you finally secured, a future for yourself, so to speak, and maybe for your children. But what is life really all about? What is your legacy really going to be? In the end, it's not enough just to say I made a lot of financial success on my company. That's not enough. And especially for a Christian leader, we know that's not enough, right? There's a real ache then because we realize, gosh, we've sacrificed so much of our time, so much of our energy. Sometimes the leader, unfortunately, has even sacrificed their relationships with their family. all in this drive that's kind of seized possession of them. And I'm not saying it's all a good thing. I'm not saying it's all acceptable. Like some of this is, rooted in a lot of sinfulness, or even in the natural state of a sinful person who's got a lot of pride and vanity. But whatever it is, it's the story of many, many people who, succeeding, turn around to say, my success is empty unless I can have a legacy where I can pass on the spirit, the things that I learned. I remember sitting with a fellow one time who said, I am a master at selling cars and buying cars. I could sell and buy used cars, and none of my children know how to do that. And none of them have asked me. No one ever asks me for advice on when they come to buy or sell their car, even though I know how to do this. It's this little anecdote, right? But you could put that in a million different ways. And so many business people, they want to turn around and start to mentor, or they volunteer so that they can pass on. They go and speak at their high schools or get programs launched to train people in leadership. And it's beautiful. And it's all a sign of the desire that we have. Success is not real success if it's only fleeting, right? And so as a Christian, of course, we turn around and we say, well, success is also not only a success if it's only financial, right? Like there's also the spiritual success of the thing, folks. And that's the advantage of a Christian leader, is that we're not just looking for profit. We're looking for spiritual benefit, and to do that, we make these decisions, right? But regardless of where you're coming from, that question of legacy is a huge one. And it's something that I want to treat with you, later on in another one of our courses here at the St. John Leadership Network. I want to go into that with you. But right now, I want you to think about that in the life of Solomon, because the Bible literally describes his legacy and puts it out there for us as if to show us that this is also a part of our human condition, something that we should be concerned about. That the choices that we make now have consequences for the impact that God wanted to make with our lives. Okay, so like to think, yes, in the here and now about the circumstances and decisions that I have to make, but then to have a vision that those choices need to be crafted also with a view to what will happen for those who are following me. What will happen with those whom I'm influencing? In the case of Solomon, for example, it's his own son. He has a son named Rehoboam, and Rehoboam's going to be like the worst king of all time. Not the worst of all, but like basically one of the worst of all time. And he's just going to, with Rehoboam, he's going to make all kinds of bad decisions, and the whole kingdom of Solomon is going to fall. And it's because of, the son of Solomon. Well, where did the son of Solomon learn to be a bad king? Well, it's a part of the legacy of Solomon that he didn't care enough to craft and to form and to educate his own successor. So it's going to be, in a sense, a real lack of wisdom, that all of the fruitfulness that Solomon creates and achieves in his life, which is astounding, is then placed in the hands of somebody who's going to destroy it. Because Solomon did not take the time to think enough about his legacy and to make his legacy intentional. And this is the challenge that I have for you. You're sitting here in front of me today because you are men and women of success. Who is going to continue in the same vein? Again, I'm not talking about just earthly financial success, right? Because that's only a small part of it. The reason you're financially successful is probably because of your character and the people that you are. Yes, but what about the character of those who are underneath you? And oftentimes what happens with business leaders is that to get to the place where we get of success, we have literally cut ourselves off from the parenting and the grandparenting and the mentoring that should distinguish our lives. Well, there's a flaw there. Remember this, right? No success is real success if it's only fleeting. The real success is going to be a success that repeats itself because the same recipe is given. The recipe for success comes from character. And the recipe for character, includes faith, right? Faith, family, relationships, that the strength of the human dignity and the soul, right? Well, how are you doing passing that on? That's got to be part of our calculus. It wasn't in for Solomon, and so we're going to look at that now. Let's take a look together at where Solomon rose and where he fell and what that means for the legacy he leaves.
Would you like to hear more from Father Nathan? Join the St. John Leadership Network and receive a 2-minute glance at the gospel every Sunday morning right to your phone. To learn more, go to www.stjohnleadershipnetwork.org/member and join for free today.
When we look at the life of King Solomon, we're looking again at First Kings chapter 3 to chapter 11. In his life, the whole thing, the motif that flows through it is this relationship that he had with God. That I think is also amazing, because you have so many people today that are like, what does faith have to do with business? And I'm like, well, as King Solomon, okay? Because King Solomon's earthly greatness flowed from his relationship with God. So I also just throw that back out to you, because here you are, Christian leaders, and you're wondering, well, what does my Christianity have to do with my leadership? And I'd say pretty much everything, because your greatness will flow from the great one. The greater the one you worship, the greater that your life can become. You expand to the dimensions of the one you worship. Not that you become God or anything like that, but that God works through you. You have a heart that loves, that can love, and a mind that can think to the dimensions of God, because you're actually in communion with him. Now, not, of course, the dimensions of God, literally speaking, but you get the point what I'm trying to say. Like the Christian person's best friend is Almighty God. How could that be something that could go against you? Like, how could that hurt you? It's not. And Solomon shows it right there in the Bible. He's an earthly king. He's building things, building cities, building the temple, the greatest building in the entire area. He's, someone who's ruling over hundreds of thousands of people at once, and he nails it. His people live in peace. There's prosperity throughout the land. He lives in harmony. He's gaining taxes and gold in abundance. I mean, like an insane amount of gold is brought to him. He's got his throne covered in gold. He's got walls covered in gold. He has prosperity throughout the land. And it's all because he was a great ruler. And the Bible's telling us he was a great ruler because of his relationship with God. Being a friend of God didn't hurt him, it helped him. It made him wise. And in that wisdom, he ruled, such that he took the breath away from the Queen of Sheba, who traveled all around the world just to see him and couldn't believe what she saw, right? Okay, that's all the story of Solomon. And then in chapter 11, his tragic downfall. That actually what happens with Solomon is that he breaks his relationship with God. And, you could say because of lust. I think that's probably part of it, right? But what's revealed is that he has 1,000 wives and he lets them worship their foreign gods. And he even supplies for their worship of the foreign gods. So he breaks the covenantal relationship of God and becomes, adulterous in his heart. Right? Not faithful to the covenant that he had with God. He becomes, supporting the worship of other gods. So he allows his religious identity to become clouded. He subverts the unique focus of his life on the singular great one who is the Lord, the God of Israel. And he allows it to become dispersed, basically equating God with other main things in his life. And how many of us do that? It's a real temptation. We can think, oh my gosh, he's a terrible person, Solomon. He ends up worshiping these pagan gods. Well, I'm like, aren't all of us kind of, facing that, especially in America today, where we have so many things. It's kind of like, do we let the kids play soccer on Sunday, or do we make them go to church? Well, you're like, they can't not go on the soccer team. I'm like, yes, they can. Like, really, like, we're talking about God here, everybody. Like, God is not a soccer ball. Okay. God is not a soccer ball. But you're like, oh, Father. It's like, no, I'm serious. God is God. I use that one example of soccer, but you could use a million examples in your life where we kind of are tempted to just equate it. We don't say that we don't have a religion. We don't say that we don't have faith. We just relativize our faith and our religion to a level that we're all more comfortable with, which is basically saying that there's many gods. All right. And that's exactly what Solomon does. What happens when he breaks that covenant with God? He falls. All right. And we see this happening. God ends up allowing that dissipation of Solomon's religious sense to be reflected in his life. And instead of the singular focus that allows him to harmonize all of the different dimensions of his life into this one wonderful recipe of greatness, a harmony, which has been a spectacular success in his life, because he loses the unifying factor of that harmony, his religion, all of those different spots start to fall apart. And this is, reflected in 1 Kings chapter 11, verse 9, where it says, "And the Lord was angry with Solomon because his heart had turned away from the Lord, the God of Israel, who had appeared to him twice and had commanded him concerning this thing, that he should not go after other gods, but he did not keep what the Lord commanded. And therefore the Lord said to Solomon," verse 11, "Since this has been your practice, and you have not kept my covenant and my statutes that I have commanded you, I will surely tear the kingdom from you and give it to your servant." Oh my goodness. Well, there he is. He's like, you're going to lose your legacy, Solomon, because you did not keep the source of what made you great to begin with. And we can see here, of course, a warning for us all. And I love to emphasize this. You're not here in front of me today being the people that you are because, you didn't work at it. And because you didn't sacrifice. You did great things with your life. And most of you have risen to where you are today because, in fact, you worked at it and sacrificed for it. And you paid the price for your success. And yes, you were fortunate in many ways. And yes, you were blessed in many ways. Absolutely. And yet at the same time, your character has made you a leader. Okay. So when you start thinking about that, it should sink in. A character is God's recipe for success. And what's neat about it is that maybe in the end, you're not even financially successful. Maybe you have all kinds of things happen in your business life, but you'll still be a success because as long as you have your dignity and as long as you have the sense of yourself that comes from true goodness and virtue, then it doesn't matter what you have on the outside. That's only an extra. That's the great thing about following a God who died on a cross, okay? Like you look at the life, the success of Jesus, you're like, well, it's kind of hard to say he was earthly successful until the resurrection, and then that was a supernatural success, and that's what we follow. So I don't want you to get too hung up in the question of, am I going to be successful or not on earth? I want you to get really hung up, though, on the question of whether or not I'm going to be successful on the inside, whether or not my character is really going to be sound. Because this is what the Bible shows us was at the secret of Solomon. And the moment he lost his character and he lost that religious focus that kept him together, God ends up saying he's going to punish him. Now, you can't take that too literally for us, whatever, because the punishments of God is a theological thing. You got to, read it correctly. But in the simplicity of this story, it totally makes sense. You're like, okay, he lost what made him great. And God is now going to allow the consequences of that loss to be felt in his life, right? So this is where it's a bit of a warning for us, yeah, but it's also just a great lesson because it doesn't have to just be a warning. It can also be an encouragement to us to keep on the royal road, to stay with your faith, to keep putting God first, because we see that when you put God as the center of your life, think about what God is. He's the ultimate goodness. He's the perfect thing. He's the excellence, most extraordinary. If you put perfect goodness and extraordinary excellence at the center of your soul, what will happen? Well, your life will be extraordinary. That's what will happen. Maybe not on the outside. I don't know about that, but definitely on the inside where it really matters. And now taking that as a perspective, what happens when we take God out of that? What happens to our life? Well, we're going to see what happens to Solomon is not a pretty thing.
Would you like to start your Thursday mornings with a scriptural leadership lesson? Join the St. John Leadership Network, where Father Nathan hosts a 30-minute call at 6:30 a.m. in all 4 U.S. time zones. To learn more, go to www.stjohnleadershipnetwork.org/member and join for free today.
1 Kings chapter 11, verses basically 9 to 43 is the end of the life of Solomon. And we see that in the end, his legacy that he leaves is something that he loses, right? So on the one hand, you've got a legacy of Solomon, a reputation that's been amazing, right? His name lives on as just an example of the wisdom and the fruit of the wise. He left behind the temple in Jerusalem until it was destroyed, of course. But it was destroyed many years later. For many years, it stayed. His temple, his architecture remained, but his spiritual legacy was tarnished. Why? Because he let it be tarnished. He turned his back on God. He didn't put God as number one. And well, therefore he's remembered as somebody who didn't put God as number one. And it came behind, 1,000 wives and all of that. But in the end, that was the real problem. He broke the commandments of God and he worshiped other gods. Right? You could say, well, that's kind of a primary thing. Because what does that mean for us in our life? Well, to worship God means that you have a focal point, which is the ultimate why behind everything that you do. And you think about it that way. What's the point of religion? Religion gives you an ultimate why. I know what I'm doing it for, and I know that what I'm doing it for is good and right and true and beautiful and excellent because I'm doing it for God. Well, you take that away, and what are you left with? Sometimes people say religion is a confining thing. And I say, well, maybe it's kind of like the riverbanks on water. Water without riverbanks is just a mud puddle. If you put banks on the water, it flows and becomes pure and beautiful and gives life. But without banks, that same water is just a swamp, right? Well, it's like that with our life. Yes, religion can be confining. Yes, it's something to say that there is a God and I worship him. Yes, and I go to mass on Sunday and I go to confession at least once a year and I tithe to the church and all that stuff. Yeah, it can be confining. And yet it's what makes us great. And Solomon lost that. And when he lost that, he loses the sign of that from God is that he will lose his legacy. Literally, God says, I won't do it while you're alive, but I'll do it when you're dead. So I'll be merciful to you in your life, but then your legacy will be tarnished. This is an amazing just kind of, thought for us. So what happens? So verse 14, verse 23, and verse 26 describes the rise of 3 different enemies of Solomon, all of whom then harass his kingdom and, terrorize his kingdom, tear his thing apart. They work against unity. Right? So each of the 3 of these stories is similar. It's all someone who was of an enemy of Solomon, or of King David, either King David or King Solomon, whom they had subdued, the father of, but the son of the father stayed, usually in exiles, either in Syria or it's in Egypt, that they go into exile. And then the sons come back to attack Solomon at the moment of his weakness. Right? So you have this external pressure, which I think is amazing because on the one hand, we can think, oh no, I've already defeated those foes. I've won those victories. We could say in our own life, that was something that I've put behind me, right? And it's never done. There's always an external threat that can rise up. And so part of the story here of Solomon is that God allows those external threats to not die, but to be revived. And so now the kingdom of Solomon is torn by this pressure coming from 3 different enemies at 3 different angles who are attacking it from the outside. The real problem becomes with the son of Solomon named Rehoboam. And in 1 Kings chapter 12, it talks about what happens to Rehoboam. And basically, he's a lousy leader. The people come to him and they say, my goodness, we're working too hard. Could you, please ease up on us? And Rehoboam says, no way, I'm going to be even tougher on you than my dad was. And so he causes a rebellion and all kinds of the stories go on in 1 Kings of the fall of the United Kingdom, where things are torn away and exactly what God foresees, that the unity of Solomon's legacy will be taken away, will be divided in rivalry, in fighting. And of course, where there's division, there's a lack of synergy, there's a lack of prosperity, there's a collapse. And this is exactly what happens in the house of Israel. And it's detailed for many years and over many chapters. But the source of it is the moment that Solomon decides to not give God the pride of place. What unites us in our person and what unites our legacy are our principles. Okay, to speak in, and I want you to think about that, because sometimes we think, oh no, our principles are just, they're arbitrary. No. And I think it'll be a great exercise for every one of you to do is to write down the three principles that have made you to be the great person that you are. I mean, you might say, well, I'm not a great person. Well, how about the person that you are? What are the three things that defined you, that are the secrets for your success on a spiritual level, of the level of character, your principles, what you stand for, the laws by which you live, right? And of course, I'm certainly hoping that they refer to God, because it's the truth, is that in the end, all principles get their force because of their relationship with God. But in the end, you write those down. Now ask yourself, what am I doing actively to pass these principles on? Because those principles have united you, right? Those principles have held you together. And those principles, of course, come from your faith. Your faith gives you that truth. Because of God, these things are true. Well, and if those have held you together into the unity that you are, you need to pass those on so that the unity remain. Your legacy needs to be more than financial. It needs to be spiritual. You need to pass on to the next generations the secrets for your character. And I'm here to remind you as your priest that it's God who's at the source of that and your practice of religion. What are you doing to pass that on? Have you witnessed to your children about your own faith? Have you passed on in your company a culture that's defined by those principles and shown where those principles come from? Use your leadership to create your legacy. Don't be like Solomon and have a collapse that's so utter because his collapse on the outside, because his collapse on the inside was complete. Instead, as you stand for principles, pass them on. As you stand for God, pass it on. As you were unified, so your legacy will be.
Dare great things for Christ.
Share your feedback with Father Nathan. Send us an email at communications@stjohninstitute.org. That's communications@stjohninstitute.org. And visit www.stjohninstitute.org and sign up for our newsletter to receive updates from Father Nathan.